talking about 8 to 8.5% kind of growth if you go by the new GDP numbers. And I really want to speak to people and understand here whether this is starting to feel like an 8% economy, or if not, at least do they think we're moving in that direction?
Well, you've not yet seen the investment cycle taking off. I think that has really been the key that we've all been waiting for. But if you see the way the government has come about in the last 10 months as well as the budget itself, there have been a lot of measures which have been taken to facilitate people to get into businesses. So a lot of encouragement has been provided to private sector companies, ease of doing business, processes of getting approvals are a lot faster, and so many more things have taken place. So I think it's a matter of time. We need to give it a little more time. To me, the most important, and I know this is not your question, but to me the most important part of the budget has been the fact that they've not sort of focused only on that one fiscal deficit target and have let that slip a little bit, because by letting it slip, they really looked at growth, and I think that growth will come back in the economy. We just have to give it a little time.
If last year was at 7.5%, it does feel like 8% GDP growth. But if last year was 5.5%, then it's clearly not 8% GDP growth. So the point is, I don't believe that you're likely to see, again, like I said, depending on which number you take into account for last year, that you'll get to 8% anytime soon. As Keki said, unless the investment cycle comes back and comes back fast, I think it will take some time for us to get to 8% GDP growth.
I think there's a bit of a disconnect between the macro and the micro in a sense. I think the macro is giving us quite a number of positive signals. I think India looks wonderful from a global perspective. We're a growth oasis in a global world looking for growth. We have significant investment opportunities in a world which is really full of liquidity. So I think the macro looks good. We have a current account deficit heading the right way, fiscal deficit. But on the ground, I think the companies are still going through their own challenges. So I think the big thing for me in the budget is this recognition that the government really has to kickstart the investment cycle, and the government has to kickstart growth. And I think therefore putting this fiscal consolidation on hold for a while and giving this push to infrastructure through the 70,000 crores, I think is really a big signal to seeing where the growth will come from, and that should give us some confidence that we should see growth coming through as the spend on railway, as the spend on road kind of starts kicking off.
What are you encouraged by? The public spending boost, the fact that central public sector enterprises are being encouraged to spend, and then hopefully the private sector catches up? Are you encouraged by the specific fund that's been set up?
The government in the first 10 months has created that enabling environment for businesses to flourish. But the fact of the matter is that investments have not started, and my sense or my reason why the investments have not started is if you look at the two sectors, if you look at infrastructure and other than infrastructure. Let's look at infrastructure first. The companies which are today in the infrastructure space, many of these companies have over-leveraged balance sheets, and therefore they do not have the ability to borrow too much more money or implement too many new projects. Companies with strong balance sheets are in sectors where they don't need investments. They don't need investments because there is excess capacity. So the first, that excess capacity has to get used up, and once the excess capacity gets used up, they will start investing again. Now how do you do that? So if private sector is not going to invest, the role of investment has to be taken on by the government, and therefore, in my view, I've said this time and again, I think it's a very, very apt measure that the government is investing this 70,000 crores. The fact of the matter is that for the last 3-4 years, investments have been weak, the investment cycle has been weak, and to revive that is going to take a little time.
There was a statistic that was put out, I think, by the government just a couple of days back, that I think there's 224 infrastructure projects with cost overruns of 2.1 trillion. I mean, that's the kind of track record we have.
I think it's important to understand that where we are is largely our own creation. And the reality is that you're not going to be able to get risk capital back into this sector unless you first solve the problems that remain to be solved. Now on that front, certainly the government has done quite a bit. The power sector is the largest bottleneck in terms of issues and projects that remain stuck, and the amount of unproductive capital that's locked in that sector. It also happens to be a sector that is very critical for the economy in general. So you can't really execute on Make in India or anything else without power. So it's important to make sure that the power sector is revived. And on that front, certainly the government has done quite a bit in terms of at least getting the fuel issues sorted out surrounding coal. They've recently announced a gas framework to get the gas plants functioning at least a capacity to service debt. Some of these still need to fall into place, but they've at least taken measures to try and address the problems that exist on the fuel side. So the point is that unless you debottleneck existing projects and people actually see resolution of those projects, you're not going to see fresh investments.
Mr. Bagchi, what are you hearing from infrastructure companies? I mean, you've dealt with a number of them. I mean, some of them have tried to deleverage, not as much as the market would like to see them deleverage, but is that process going forward and then next phase of investment perhaps 2 years, 3 years down the line?
I think there are sort of three blocks in which it is moving. One block is the pure sort of inputs to the economy block. And the inputs to the economy block, we certainly got a bonus. When the crude prices fell, commodity prices fell, and there is a resources which got freed, which I must say in this budget, government used it very judiciously and allocated the capital very judiciously and didn't fritter it away. So I think that was very big positive. Second one, which I would put it as supply chain / infrastructure. Essentially the cost of that is very high, and our estimate is that 13% of GDP is stuck in projects. Now any economy where 13% of the GDP is stuck and not giving you any return is really a big cause of concern. Third, I would say, which is the demand driver. In the demand driver, what is happening is demand driver essentially comes when you have net savings in the economy. If you look at last 5 years, the net savings in the economy has come down. Because of the supply bottlenecks, infrastructure bottlenecks, the inflation has not come down. And so what has happened is that the savings itself has come down and dwindled. And because there was no confidence, it has also gone into physical savings. And when you go into physical savings, the money doesn't circulate. So the other big thing in the budget has been that there has been attempt to monetize some of those fixed physical asset saving that has happened and recycle it back into the economy. And thus the effort has been on the infrastructure side. We see some of the merger acquisition situation where asset is being sold. I think it should get accelerated, otherwise the maths doesn't add up. Certainly capital raising up to a point will happen. In these leverage companies will have to take assets out which are viable and then raise capital within those assets. But I must say that most of it has been done because over a period of time, such has been the pressure that wherever one could raise capital, by and large one has raised capital there. Fortunately, we are not a very export-led economy. To that extent, we are much safer than the other economy. But to give this argument that, within the emerging markets, we are in a sweet spot, which we are, because it is difficult to, put money relatively in Russia or Brazil or other places. But that cannot be the only rationale to feel very happy about. Because the other thing that is happening, we must understand from an FII perspective is that the allocation towards emerging market itself is weakening because the developed economies are doing well. And so it has to be led by public spending, because this whole 13% of GDP has to be led by public spending, has to be led by debottlenecking of the policy, and whatever be it, it has to be debottlenecked so that 13% of GDP starts to contribute. Then we will have the 8.5% growth that we are talking. So certainly the movement is happening in a fairly coherent manner. So that's a very positive thing. It's not knee-jerk reaction. So it is happening in a coherent manner. And I think we must use this time, quickly and fast. This bonus that we have got of lower commodity prices, use it, and I think we have a golden chance.
I just want to actually move to the bigger story on inflation and interest rates, maybe not directly linked to the budget, although this time it sort of is. Mr. Karve, one part of the budget which got a lot of attention, at least in Mumbai circles, was the whole inflation targeting framework which has been formalized. And I bring that up because as a consumer industry which is very impacted by inflation, do you think this new framework will give you a little bit more predictability on the assumption that by and large the central bank can hold on to those targets? Does that give more predictability in terms of planning business?
Any initiative that the government takes up which controls inflation at an overall level would help improve the net disposable income in the hands of the consumers and hence improve the sales growth of the consumer good companies. So I would say the measures in terms of keeping the interest rates low, giving bank enough money to lend to deserving borrowers, I think it's the move in the right direction.
I want to first talk about the NPS and the fact that it got a 50,000 rupee tax break. I want to open it up with you, Gautam, to say that is it really a tax break which funnels money towards a product? So we know what the problems with the NPS have been. The cost structure is tiny, there is no incentive on the product to sell. So do you think the government can leap over those barriers and just with this tax break get the people into the product?
I think if you look at the tax break, I think it is advantageous. A lot of people, unfortunately look at very short-term planning when they look at the ATC investments or ATCCD investments. They just put in money because, okay, it's now time to invest, and that's where probably the government is trying to target that, okay, I've exhausted my ATC limit of 1,50,000, let me put in another 50,000 into this product. Frankly speaking, I think the problem really is with the structure. If you look at it on maturity, what happens? So it's really not very attractive to an investor from that perspective. The other aspect which I think has not got much publicity is the fact that, the way the amendment has been worded, there is some doubt as to whether you need to be first contributing under the first part of it to get the advantage of the second 50,000. So because it talks about in addition to the amount referred to earlier. And that's where I think there could be some dispute in the future, particularly given the tax department's propensity to litigate on small matters, unfortunately.
I want to pick up on another point that Gautam mentioned, which is the structure of the NPS says that when you reach 60, 40% of the money is an annuity, 60% you get as a lump sum. But the annuity market doesn't exist. I mean, you have LIC annuities which are still Neanderthal in their structure.
No, I think the problem is more fundamental. Even the amount that you get, you commute is taxable at this point of time. And annuity is anyway taxable. So the issue is more basics than annuitization and what you get upfront. So I think that...
No, looking ahead, we can imagine that since the government is going year by year, maybe next year you get either EEE in NPS or you get EPF as EET. So let's put that off the table. I mean, yes, there is a tax arbitrage. We think the tax arbitrage will go away. But just looking at annuities, I mean, that becomes a deterrent for a number of people who may not need the NPS in terms of they have EPF, but like the NPS because of its market exposure, but are worried about handing 40% of their life savings over to a product which we don't know what it will be.
No, again, the issue is more taxation, because why is the annuity market not taken off? If suppose there was an immediate annuity kind of a proposition, the entire money that you get out of annuity today is taxable. That means you're practically taxing both the principal and interest. Now that makes it completely unattractive. So unless you correct that situation, I don't think so. I mean, you will have products which will match that kind of situation. You correct it, I'm sure insurance companies will come out with products.
So you're saying basically you need the annuity to be tax-free. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying both. Today, let's compare NPS with the PPF. Right? It's a 15-year product. It's got a little more flexibility on withdrawal. The advantages of an NPS is you've got a choice between equity, government debt and private debt. Over a longer period of, you accumulate over 30, 40 years, and then the entire amount that you get is going to be taxed, which includes the principal that you have taken as exemption on. That makes it really unattractive.
Nilesh, mutual funds are kind of a stepchild to the budget always. Every year we think they will get something, or there was this whole retirement plan which was being planned, but nothing really comes. In fact, there was a service tax slap which the industry got. So, does it leave you competitive? Do you think that the other guys have got a better deal?
So we are not the prodigal son. When he returns, they cut the check for it. We deliver about 20% return per annum on our equity funds to investors. That's too much for them, right? Why should people make 20% return? They should be happy with 8% in EPFO. If we make country richer, that will be a crime in this country. And which is why we receive the stepmotherly treatment every budget after budget.
I will come to you, Lovai. Will you now, as a wealth manager, you have a practice which is pan-India, you have people from abroad, Indians from abroad as your clients. Would you now recommend the NPS because of the extra room in the tax basket?
Yeah, so I think by definition, I sort of hate it when investors make decisions based on tax. But I think I also accept the fact that tax possibly helps change behavior. And if a tax break is going to allow people to look at retirement products which have some equity element in it as an option and NPS as an option. Maybe it will solve the problem of having more funds coming to NPS, so fund managers will pay more attention, so they'll perform better. So, we who offer fee-based services will say, yes, put some more money over there. So I think our approach has typically been use a basket. So NPS will become part of the basket, whether it become a very large portion or not. I think it will not become straight off. It will be a slow and steady sort of climb up. And I think that we have to look at it from that perspective.
Atul, what will be your sort of reaction to what you've heard about the product and different windows of looking at it?
See, we generally deal with high net worth individuals, so NPS is not really a sort of key element in their basket. But I agree with Loa. I mean, I think every investor will have to look at it as one element of the basket, depending on how big the basket is. And pension products or social security, I think Ajay mentioned before, is sort of forms the base of that saving pyramid or that wealth that you're building. So as you start building wealth, I mean, this is almost the first element that you look at. And as you get richer or you have more disposable income, you move on to other baskets, and then the base sort of becomes irrelevant. But you've got to build the base first.
Is it very difficult to handhold people through a market dip?
Yes, I think it is difficult. In fact, we think that that's our primary job, to be sort of that emotional counselor to the client, because you have these examples. I mean, it's a cliche, but when the market is all the money comes in near the market peak, right? So and when the market goes up, the client always says that, hey, if that stock was 20% lower, I wish that stock was 20% lower and I would surely invest. I like the stock, but just the price is high. And when that stock is 20% lower, the news flow is so bad about that stock
he doesn't have the appetite,
that he doesn't have the strength to actually invest at that point. And that's where we come in and we say that, hey, what, if we really decided on this particular strategy in going about investing in a structured manner, then we should really bite the bullet and invest. And most of the great investments are made at that point when the stock is 20% down. So it is a big task for us.
I think the important thing is to talk to people about allocation and the fact that no one single asset class will always give you great return, or no one single asset class will always go down. So I think the increased communication with clients has helped to hold on to clients, and pretty much I think we have been successful in holding on to clients over a period of time. And I think allocation is the key word. So many of the individual, let's say, product providers, so Nilesh will talk mutual funds, Sandeep will say insurance, need to have somebody, the advisor, who does that. And my take is that everyone in this audience and every individual needs a financial advisor. They can be themselves if they understand finance, they have the time, and they can remove emotion.
The function of managing the government's debt, that function is taken away from the RBI and a separate PDMA is set up, which means the government bond buying program is now not handled by the Reserve Bank of India. Nilesh, do you think this will be one step towards ending financial repression?
In some sense, the government is the largest borrower in India, and if they keep nominal interest rate below the real interest rate, they benefit. And we have seen time and again where interest rates have remained negative on the real side, benefiting government and punishing the savers. Now, the proposal is that if RBI splits its merchant banking business, which is acting as an arranger for government securities, vis-a-vis the monetary policy conduit which they have to do, then maybe they will not have this dual liability or dual responsibility. So if there is an independent public debt management office, they will manage government's borrowing program, and RBI, without bothering about that, will continue to manage monetary policy and interest rates, which will be fair to the borrower as well as to the saver. So that, if carried out in that fashion, will certainly end this financial repression, where sometimes government ended up benefiting at the cost of the savers.